Well, good evening, my friends. This is the Good Friday service at the Bonner Springs United Methodist Church. I am Pastor Andy. And although Good Friday might sound like a good time, if you have not been to one of these services, this is our most solemn service for the year. So if you are needing an uplifting word, don't forget part 2 of this is on Easter morning. We have our services 9 o'clock outside, 10:45 right here in the sanctuary. This, though, is a time where we ready ourselves to hear the good news. When we are reminded that it didn't only start with good news, that first there was the grave. And tonight we are going into that grave. We're talking about Jesus' betrayal. We're talking about his crucifixion. And to get us started tonight, I would invite you to stand and sing with me hymn number 292, What Wondrous Love Is This? Will you stand and sing? Our first reading tonight is from the book of John, the 11th chapter, verses 47 through 50 and 53. Hear now the word of the Lord. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called together the council and said, "What are we going to do? This man is doing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our people." One of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, told them, "You don't know anything. You don't see that it's better for you that one man die for the people rather than the whole nation be destroyed?" From that day on, they plotted to kill him. This is the word of God for the people of God. I invite you now to stand again and sing with me hymn number 298, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. Will you sing?
Escape.
you join me in a spirit of prayer? Dear Lord, as we come to your word today, as we try to find ourselves in this story, God, I pray that you would send your Spirit to testify to ours. God, that we would see your truth plainly. God, that we would be readied for what is to come. God, we thank you and we love you. Amen. So, I've been reading a lot of the Old Testament recently with our Read the Bible Challenge. And I don't know when the last time you read Leviticus was, but I'll tell you what, there is a whole lot of stuff in there that we would normally not think polite to talk about in church, or maybe anywhere else, except with our doctor or our partner in a time of desperate need. Truly, some of the most bodily and blush-inducing things you can think of are spelled out completely bluntly and unashamedly. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say unashamedly, I do not mean to say that Leviticus is calling for us to be really at peace with the more icky and sticky parts of our creatureliness. Most of the time, in fact, it was telling us that we are, in fact, unclean whenever we had some very normal bodily functions. In the book of Leviticus, there is a very deep engagement with what to do with the fact that being in a body is kind of gross. Because, let's face it, it really is sometimes. If you've ever cared for a kid, you know this. Especially when they hit that place in their development where they can wiggle their diaper off during nap time. Some of my boys' greatest and most expansive art projects to date have been in that particular medium. Gross. One of the things I have loved as I have been reading through Leviticus, though, is that there is an answer for almost everything. It's not just icky bodily discharges they have a remedy for. Whatever creative way you could think of to sin or make yourself unclean, there is a contingency plan for that. And the rules about how to stay clean are so specific. Sometimes I almost feel like certain commands have specific people in mind because they are so specific. Like Moses might have originally said, "Don't eat owls. They're unclean," thinking that might be enough to satisfy everyone, right? They're unclean. That's okay. But then Jethro over there didn't get the message. So Leviticus 11 is like, "Don't eat the eagle owl, the short-eared owl, the long-eared owl, any kind of hawk." Are you listening, Jethro? Get the picture? And Jethro chimes in, "Okay, but let's say I'm like hungry. Like really hungry. And for example, I wanted to eat a tawny owl." You didn't mention that one specifically by name. So Moses, can I please eat that one? Then Moses, exasperated, continues on. "Okay, Jethro, don't eat the tawny owl, the fisher owl, the screech owl, the white owl." Moses stops for a second just to take a breath and happens to catch Jethro out of the corner of his eye, crunching vigorously with feathers hanging all out of his mouth. And Moses says, "Is that the Scops owl? Jethro, are you kidding me?" Jethro chimes in, mouthful of Scops owl. "But you didn't say Scop." Moses cuts him off, saying, "The Scops owl was literally the next thing on my list. I have all the leading ornithologists in all of Israel here trying to keep me ahead of your insatiable and inexplicable desire to eat owls, Jethro. You understand that people are going to be reading super long and oddly specific lists of birds thousands and thousands of years from now because of you. I hope you're happy." While Jethro tries to finish his bite with less obvious crunching now, Moses continues on, glaring at him. "Yes, Jethro, the Scops owl, and for that matter, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and gosh, Jethro, in the name of everything holy, don't eat bats." I hear pandemics can get started that way. Get the picture, Jethro. No eating owls or yucky flying things of any kind. Oh, yeah. And if you thought today was bad, Jethro, you just wait until chapter 18 when I tell you that what you can't sleep with. Gosh, you really do complicate everything. Insane. Now, I joke about the specifics here, but there really is something amazing about how seriously they took all of this stuff. Everything that went into us and came out of us had the potential to make us unclean. And normally, we just like the people writing Leviticus, we don't really want to deal with that ickiness of life always. We don't want to have to spell stuff out and air our dirty laundry. Leviticus is blunt about it up front, for sure, but not because they like talking about the yuppie bodily stuff any more than we did, probably. It's most likely because they were so concerned about not defiling what was holy that they wanted things to be known up front so the ickiness of our bodies and our sin could be dealt with and cleaned up so it wasn't out in public and it didn't infect anything else. After all, God's very presence was with God's people there in the wilderness where they got these commands. They were only to bring the very best of themselves before God. They needed to cleanse themselves of all bodily and other grossness in order to be worthy, in order to enter God's presence. And, honestly, don't we at least kind of agree with them there? I mean, this place that we gather here is set apart. It's holy. We dress in a certain way. We act in a certain way. We bring our very best, most purified, put-together selves here. We grumble a little when the pastor talks about bodily functions on Good Friday. I mean, most of us try to remain put together and looking clean here. This isn't a place for marital conflict or deep, dark honesty about our sexual shame. This isn't a place for talking about how we hide uncertainties and fears behind our rigid political ideologies that help us feel a little secure, like we have a place. This isn't a place for admitting how profoundly lost and desperate we feel sometimes. It's not a place we want to burden people with our thoughts of despair or ever admit to folks we've been feeling suicidal. It isn't a place to tell people that our relationships are broken and sometimes abusive, or that our lives are actually in shambles, even though we look really happy and put together. It isn't a place to say that sometimes we get so angry at our kids that we scare ourselves. It isn't a place to say that our faith has such holes in it sometimes that practically we just believe and show up out of habit a lot of the time. It isn't a place to admit that we would so much rather be comfortable than be revived so often. Gosh, this is God's presence after all. We can't bring actual uncleanness here, can we? This is a clean place. In Leviticus, at least, they say it up front. It's a guidebook on how not to bring our uncleanness before the Lord. And what's cool about Leviticus is as many things as Leviticus tells you that you can't do, or tells you that these things make you unclean, there's actually in there so many rituals to make you clean too. And that's kind of the point of the whole thing. If you've done this unclean thing, then there's a way to be cleansed, to be made perfectly right before God. Let's say you did something that you might have heard, kills kittens or makes you go blind when you do. No worries. All you have to do is wash up, wait a few days, and sacrifice a couple of turtle doves. Voila, you're clean. If you find something that isn't yours and you decide to keep it, well, when you get found out, you just pay it back with interest, and you're made whole again. If you strike someone out of anger, guess what? There's a way to handle that too. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And then it's even. Retributive justice. In most places, for most infractions, you or some animal has to pay the price, and everything becomes totally square. And the idea, back in Leviticus, is that if you follow these rules, you are in good graces. You can come before the Lord and be clean, be in God's very presence. There's something almost mechanical about it. If I do cleansing ritual, then I am clean. Okay, blameless before the Lord. It's simple, straightforward. I kind of like that. I like how neat and tidy it is. And even though I don't follow much of what is in Leviticus, I can see where I want to gravitate toward that same sort of pattern that they follow in my own life. To make a list of rules that helps me feel clean, a pattern that I can sort of control and measure my own goodness by, hopefully then feeling clean when I come to church here before the Lord. I stay away from alcohol. I'm clean. Who cares about what I'm clogging my arteries with? I have only known, in a biblical sense, my wife. I'm justified. Who cares about what I take in my own time? I give my tithe to the church and a little extra toward UNICEF. I am absolved. Who cares what impact my financial decisions beyond that have on the other people around me? I smile at people and keep my cool when I'm around people in public. I'm understood widely to be a nice guy. Who cares if I let my anger go unchecked sometimes in my very closest relationships? We gravitate toward those things that help us feel justified and clean so that we don't have to deal with the real messiness inside of us. We prefer looking at those things that help us feel right so we don't have to deal with the real mess. And even then, sometimes we fall short of our moral standards and we feel ashamed. Many of us gather in this place with our ledgers in hand, sometimes quietly suffering in shame, but other times feeling, at least relatively justified in our actions. We may not be perfect, we reason, but surely this belief here or that money given there or this short list of kind of randomly selected moral benchmarks makes me good enough. I don't expect every person here feels like this, and most of us definitely won't go around saying it, or even thinking about it like this way explicitly, even if those patterns are still in us. But I really think that some process similar to this is at play in at least some of us here. And I do know for an absolute fact that it is at play in at least one of us here pretty often. But if you have had one of these ledgers in your hand or in your mind when you come to church, and if deep down you feel pretty justified because you can do all right steering clear of those things that make someone a really bad or unclean person, or that bring a notable amount of destruction into the world, at least better than a lot of those other folks can, then let's face it, guys, you're probably okay, right? When you're running from a bear, you don't have to be Usain Bolt to survive, okay? The folks in the middle of the crowd are usually pretty safe. The bear is just fine snacking on only the very slowest of runners. Likewise, you might not be Mother Teresa, but you're also not the one out there dealing crack to kids or working on a street corner somewhere. You're not like old Jethro trying to find every owl-eating loophole. You might not even be using too foul of language or making that dirty of jokes all that often. As long as you're up there in the middle of the crowd, you're probably good. There are a lot of us sitting up there safe, right nestled in the middle of the crowd. And if Jesus came down today, he would definitely be worried about something more important than those of us in the middle of the crowd. I sure hope so anyway. I mean, heck, if Jesus came today, who here wouldn't be there in the crowds to hear him speak? I definitely would. Could you imagine that? How awesome would it be to hear those words straight from his mouth? Who in here wouldn't be trying to fight our way up to the front to just be touched by Jesus and to be healed? Who in here wouldn't want Jesus to come over to our place and eat? We could let him know that we are his fans. We're his people. We are the ones at least once a month taking in his body and blood, being his body and blood for all the world. And we can let him know that we're among those who are doing our part to show off our ledgers and let him know that we are one of the good ones. Who in here wouldn't be right there in the crowd waving our palms right along with everyone else? Who in here, with our ledgers in hand then, who wouldn't fall deathly silent when Jesus, full of love, tells us that he didn't come to heal those who are well, but instead he came for the sick? Who in here wouldn't stand ashamed when Jesus said, "You had my word. I told you that you needed to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Who in here wouldn't start to get defensive and say, but Jesus, that's like a metaphor or something, isn't it? I think. Who in here wouldn't get red in the face when Jesus said, my child, when you think in your head that at least you are better than those people in the back of the crowd, you actually have it all backwards when you think like that. Those people are the ones truly listening when I speak to them, who truly have the ears to hear me. You don't, because you already feel justified by that ledger, and you think you are good enough not to step out into the unknown and follow me. Those people, those vile ones who listen and know deep in their heart, they are the ones who listen and know deep in their hearts that I am the one who clears ledgers, and only I. Who in here wouldn't then get indignant? Who in here wouldn't say, but wait, I've actually been trying here, Jesus, okay? I've been giving and loving. I've been doing my part. Who in here? Who in here could see or ever admit to themselves that maybe sometimes they have been more like one of those Pharisees, them armed with their Levitical laws and us with our own moral benchmarks too? Who in here could admit that they are that they are more like the Pharisees than they are like the woman at the well or the broken-hearted tax collectors that gave all they had to make their wrongs right? Who in here could see where they have been more like the religious leaders of that day than they ever would want to admit to themselves or someone else here at church? Taking a list of rules, downplaying corruption in our own hearts, and feeling justified in our benchmark keeping. Who in here could see themselves in the crowds listening to Jesus and waving those palms on Palm Sunday, but think that they just could never be among those the very next week that were right there too? When the crowd's tone shifted violently, who in here thinks they never could have been in that crowd, right there in the middle of it, where they felt so safe from bear attacks, not making waves? Who in here thinks that they could never follow those very same crowds we've been following every other step along this journey and identifying with? Who in here thinks that they then, in that one moment, would have the presence of mind then to break away when the crowd started screaming, crucify him, crucify him? Surely that would have been the moment, right? Surely we would have stopped there and made a stand for what was right then, even though we hadn't gotten it before. Who in here is sure? I wish I could tell you that I was, but I am not. Biblical scholar Walter Wink says it like this: what killed Jesus was not irreligion, but religion itself. Not lawlessness, but precisely the law. Not anarchy, but the upholders of order. It was not the bestial, but those who were considered best, who crucified the one in whom the divine wisdom was visibly incarnate. And because he was not only innocent, but the very embodiment of true religion, true law, and true order, this victim exposed their violence for what it was, not a defense of society, but an attack against God. When God came down in flesh, he could handle our vile and our icky and our unclean. He asked for it. He didn't shy away from it. He embraced it and made it clean. He came to heal all who came into his presence and had the presence of mind to admit they were broken. Who in here, in God's very presence this night, would be the ones with the ears to hear Jesus' message? Who in here would have been among those Pharisees that strung him up? Who in here was there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there?
Crucified
Then the governor's soldiers who took Jesus into the praetorium, they gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hands. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put on his own clothes. Then they led him away to crucify him. Above his head they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the laws, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And when Jesus cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit.